Tēnā katoa koutou tātou I roto I tēnei pō. Kia ora everybody, Che Wilson here from Te Pai Pai Waho, Che's channel. And just a big mihi to everybody tonight on this very muggy Waikato night. Hoi anō, let's get things started. I'll open us up and we'll get straight into number 2 on Tangihanga. Session 2 on Tangihanga. Nā reira, māku tātou wakarite. Karanga kia rangi nui a tui o nei karanga kia papai takotoa ke nei. Te putunga o te kōrero, te putunga o te wānanga, ka puta ki wau, ki te wai au, ki te ao marama. Turuturo I te waka maua kia tīna, ui e, taiki e. Taiki e kia tātou katoa. E tū ko te rangi e tū nei, e tau ko te papai takota nei, tēnei kāmi I atu ki koutou katoa, te noo atu nā, ki o koutou wākainga, tēnā koutou kia ora katoa tātou. As I said earlier, Che Wilson here from Te Pai Pai Waho, Che's channel, and what we're doing tonight is covering the second session on Tangihanga, and tonight we'll specifically talk about the first 24 hours and how you navigate through the first 24 hours. But before we do that, just acknowledge last week we did the introduction, and hopefully that helped people get an understanding of what we'll be covering, and also hope everybody's had a good long weekend. E rere tonu ana ngā mii ki te wairua te tiriti o Waitangi, nāna tātai wakararau, kia maitai, ki tēnei oinua, nō reira e tū, e te tiriti o Waitangi, e tū. Mōrena te rangi, not mōrena, got my mōrero head on, kia ora te rangi. So, the first 24 hours of Tangihanga, and I've jotted a few notes, so if you see me looking down, that's why. And when I think about Tangihanga, there's all of the emotion that you have to deal with. And notwithstanding the emotion, there's some key things that key decisions that you have to make when dealing with the death of a loved one. And these are in no specific order, but they are a few things that you should be considering as you navigate this space. And the first one is, whenever you make any decisions, be mindful of those that are also helping you, whether they are present with you or whether they're at the marae or somewhere else. Kia ora kalani. Whether they're at the marae or at the house or wherever the body is going. And be mindful of them, because they all have to take time off work as well. And if you're a bit disconnected to what happens, then link into a family member who is a bit more connected than you, so that you're making informed decisions, but also decisions that are fair for others. Yes, you have to grieve, but then there's also the burden of those that have to look after you and support you back at the marae. And some other things that you should be mindful of when you're thinking about those at home. If you've got to travel back to your marae and it's a long way, does that marae have enough hands, or do you need to send family members there early to help set up the marae? Because in some cases, it's only old people living at those maraes, and sometimes they can't even lift the tables up. And so you've got to be mindful of that. Who's back at home to help? Are there any shops that are close? And with those shops, can you be buying all of the groceries that you need, or do you have to buy them at the closest city to that marae? In addition to that, does your local shop, if you do have a shop, does it have an account? Does the marae have an account? And and the marae being comfortable that you are able to put things through the account. Because some maraes aren't, and that's simply because they've had bad experiences with whānau who don't pay their bills. And so all of that comes into some of the decisions, and being mindful of those that are doing things for you back at the place that you're going to. The other really important thing to think about when you're thinking about the home people, as well as your family, is the length of a tangi. Because somebody has to sit on the paipai, wahine and tane have to man your pie, and then you've got to have cooks who will feed you and your manuhiri through this whole time. And yet, a lot of whānau pani pitch in, but a lot of kaumātuas these days are still working when they're 70. And so the world has changed, and having the ability to be spoilt isn't always an option left for people today. So I think, that's the first key decision, in no order, is being mindful of the haukainga and mindful of others that are going to help you through your period of mourning through to the burial and hakari. Another key thing within the first 24 hours is communication generally, which then needs to be carried on throughout the whole tangihanga. But some key things to think about with regard to communication is, does your family have a phone tree, and who rings who lets people know? And how do you want people to know the message? When we were growing up, it was always a phone call. And if you lived in the same town, then there was a visit as well. But other than that, you found out usually through the phone or the newspaper. Whereas today we have social media, and a heap of people now put pānui out by social media. And then there are still others who aren't comfortable with putting out the message by social media. In addition, some are comfortable, but not until the immediate whānau or those that need to know. And if you're one of those people who really just wants to be seen as the one who gives all pānuis out, just make sure you're not being an enos, and make sure you know that all of the key people who need to know have been informed before you do that. Because sometimes it can really hurt those that need to know straight away, and for some reason haven't been able to be informed yet. And so don't jump to being the Grim Reaper and going, so-and-so's passed away, until it's all out from the whānau. And then with regard to comms, is having a clear line to whoever's running the marae, whether that's somebody on the committee, somebody who sits on the pie, or however your marae works, because the person who books the marae isn't always the person who is going to make the decisions for a tangi. So make sure you're talking to the right person at the marae. Another key decision, number 3, in the first 24 hours, is appointing a key spokesperson. Who's going to be your spokesperson? And also that person may sometimes have to be the person who makes final decisions, especially if you have a family who are fighting and don't get on, or if you have a family where somebody always stirs, and or an in-law who just upsets things. This is just what whānau is, but you've got to have people who are going to make a decision. Otherwise, when you get back to the marae, sometimes the paipai will be strong enough to just say, you fellas are being a hoha, we're going to make the decision for you. And most times they'll say it in a nice way. But if you are trying to bring your own whānau rarurarus out in front of everybody, sometimes you'll just get a growling. And sort that out beforehand. But appointing that key person to be the spokesperson, to make the decisions or to do the mahi, whatever it is important. That person's often the natural leader of the family, who may not be the oldest, but may be the natural leader, and maybe from a generation lower. Or sometimes it's the in-law who does everything for the family, and then they make the decisions. You also need to make a decision around who's going to manage the koha for you. Some marae will do that, and they'll put up a tally and identify how much money was in each envelope or each ope that came onto the marae. This is what they gave. And that's really important to note all of that, so that when you go to one of their tangis, you can either equal, you can match, or increase the koha as part of tāututu, as part of the reciprocity. I remember tangi, at the end of a tangi, the koha list would be read out, not just the money, but the kai that was given. And then later on, it started getting pinned up on the board, and it'd be there until the next hui or the next tangi, so that when people were at the marae, they could see, oh yeah, this is who gave what. And that was about keeping ourselves to check. Today, we've got a bit embarrassed about that. And we shouldn't be embarrassed that if you can only give $5 or you can give some kai from your garden, that's massive. It's a massive contribution. And writing it down is about acknowledging and remembering so that you can give back to them. And so it's all about tāututu, not about the pressure of being able to give heaps, but it's about acknowledging that whakaaro, that aroha, and the generosity of heart. The next point in the first 24 hours, there's a heap of things that you've got to go through, and sometimes these things are all sorted out in the first, few hours. There's the legal requirements. And so with the legal requirements, it's, do you need an autopsy? Usually if you've been to the doctors in the last 6 months and you die of something that's aligned to what was in your doctor's notes, then usually you don't need an autopsy. But they're becoming more and more bloody common, which is a hoha. And sometimes our people don't know how to navigate the space, and so they just push in, and the officials will then push and just say, oh, we're going to have an autopsy. And if you've got one who know how to navigate that space, let them guide you rather than going, oh, but they said this. Because sometimes you don't actually need to do that stuff. However, if the coroner gets involved, then it's almost definite that you have to follow that coronary process. And that will usually take an extra day. Very rarely can you get to be seen because we don't have enough coroners or pathologists. We're really struggling in that space as a country. But usually add another 24 hours before you get home. The other thing is the undertaker and working with an undertaker. And it's really important to notice the cost, and note that there's a cost for everything. And there isn't for an autopsy and the coroner, but for the undertaker, once the two papakas with the undertaker, the clock is ticking and it all costs money. And there are so many options today, including the embalming. You got to remember that embalming will be injecting a whole lot of poison, formaldehyde, into the body and basically poisoning the urupa. And that's been going on for a long time, since the Americanization of our funeral processes. However, there's been a massive move to go natural, to make your own coffins, and to prepare the bodies in a natural way. And some iwi are starting to also weave, and have been for a little while now, weaving, tōpaki. There are a range of names for these different capsules that are woven out of harakeke, and you get some manukas to carry the body, to make a stretcher. So there are a lot of whānau that are doing that with oil and with salt water, and then ice under the tūpāpaku. So there's those options, and if you're into that, then you need to start doing that now rather than waiting till it happens. And it's quite beautiful watching people who then weave the rest of the tōpaki or other things, rope, whatever, during the funeral process. Another thing to note while we're on the undertaker is transportation. A lot of whānau will transport their own tūpāpaku, and that's all good. And just to remember, if the coffin moves around, the body then can move around and can be, a bit lopsided when you open the casket. So, when you open the casket, just sometimes you've got to straighten the body up. And if the body's on an angle where the head is downwards, then the body's going to scrunch up and all of that as well. So all of these things that if you're not used to dealing with a tūpāpaku, they can freak you out the first time round. Another thing when you're at the undertakers is when you get there, or if you live away from a town that has the undertakers, got to remember to take the clothes with you when you leave your house. Otherwise, if it's an hour drive back to go and get them, that's a hoa and it's a long time. And the reason why time is important is because once you get back to the marae or to the house that the body will be lying in state in, you can relax for the next 3 days. And having that ability to go, I'm home, is a massive amount of comfort. So just wanted to note that it's really important about the clothes. And normally, from the time of arrival of the body, if there's no complications, at the undertakers, it can take up to 3 to 4 hours for a normal one. If there's an autopsy, when you go to clothe the person, just note that there'll be massive cuts and stitches and all of that throughout the body, because when they do an autopsy, they've got to cut the body open. And so being able to navigate all of that, and you just got to be prepared for having to deal with that and having to clothe the body and rigor mortis, because as soon as you die, you start to stiffen up. And so the sooner you can get things done instead of waiting and takamuring around because you forgot the clothes, it's good to have the clothes with you. Otherwise, or have the clothes ready once the undertakers have given you the okay to go and clothe the baby, to dress the body. Otherwise, rigor mortis sets in and it's just really hard to dress. And they'll help you, but all of those things are really important. So those are just a few key decisions, and I've probably missed some. But it's about, this session is all about how to help whānau deal with the first 24 hours of the death of a loved one. And next session I'll cover is taking the loved one from the undertakers back home, and what are the considerations and all of the different tikanga associated with that to help us navigate these things which you never really want to do, but it's a key part of life. Death is a key part of life, and so it comes to us all. And Kati, that's enough for tonight. It was quite a long session. Hoi anō, e mihi ana kia koutou katoa. Keep sending through the questions. I've noticed a few people have sent through some questions, and I've noted those for the sessions that they will fit into. And one final thing is when the body's dressed, you can always have a little karakia to before you leave the undertakers to guide you on your way. Nā reira, on that note, I'll finish us off. Kia o kairea ke nei kupu, ki te tā unui orangi nui e tūnei, au mie ui e tā ki e. See you next Tuesday for Kauhau sessions. Tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou, pō Māori re.